Okay, welcome everybody. We're starting just a couple of minutes early, or we might even be on time, but let's just leave it another couple of minutes just to make sure everyone's here. We've got a lot of people already on the call. Who have we got? Let's have a look. We've got a bunch of people. We've got Dave. Dave's in the UK. Who else have we got? Oh, that's it. Okay, Susan's calling from the States, and another Susan in Canada. That's interesting. It must be the middle of the afternoon or early afternoon for you guys there. You've got a chat box somewhere in your little console. So if you'd like to type us in a message at any point during the call, feel free to do so. We're going to be reading those messages and and replying to you. I think we're going to be saving questions until the end of the call, but type them in and we'll get to them eventually. So, all right, I think it's time. So let's make a start. Hi everyone, my name is Olly Richards. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with my good friend Anthony Metivier. Hi Anthony, are you there? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I'm here. I hear you very, very well.
Cool. All right then. So today I'm really excited about this call because we're going to be diving into memory, and memory is something that I've been personally, well, traditionally I haven't known all that much about memory. I've been learning languages and figuring things out as I went along. But since I've started to kind of dive into the world of memory techniques, I have discovered all these techniques and strategies that exist and are used by many people out there to remember things quickly. Now I've started I've tried to apply these things to my own language learning, and but it's a very big area. So what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on one thing in particular, on kind of I mean, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is really what I understand to be one of the core principles of memory techniques, which is essentially the use of visualization and memory palaces to be able to recall information effectively. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people know how to use their imagination to associate information with things, but not so much about how to place it in particular areas of your mind so that you know where to find it later, so that it's not just floating around in the void. So that's what we're
Yeah.
going to go over in some good detail that you'll be able to take away and put to work.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, don't worry if this is completely new to you, if you're completely new to memory techniques, don't worry. We're going to explain everything very clearly. Again, if you've tried to use memory techniques before, but they haven't worked for you, we're going to really walk you through step by step how it works. So, for those of you who are not familiar with us, as I said, my name is Olly Richards. I run the blog at iwillteachyoualanguage.com. Anthony is memory expert. He has a PhD, so he knows what he's talking about, and he runs a website called Magnetic Memory Method. And so he has a bunch of memory stuff over there. We'll give you all these links at the end so that you can follow up with us more. But without further ado, let's dive in. Anthony, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Ollie. That's a very nice introduction. And I just want to point out that I have sent everyone a document that sort of connects, well, it doesn't sort of connect with this webinar, it's deeply connected with it. So if you haven't already read through it, then check your email after the presentation, and that's there for you as a supplement. And so let's get started. I want to suggest that you get something to write with, and this is important because I'm going to ask you to do a quick little exercise, and that is to do a drawing like this. Now, before we get started, I just want to tell you that if you want the rare ability to quickly and easily improve your memory and effortlessly recall information anytime you wish, including years from now, then this webinar is going to lay that foundation for you, and it's going to let you really start achieving that ability right now, because this really isn't that difficult, but there are some steps that we need to know, and the more that you follow the steps in very particular ways, the more you're going to actually leverage the techniques. And so this is guidance for you. And I want to, as Ollie mentioned, there's going to be questions at the end, so please stick around for that, because often we learn the most from hearing the questions other people have, and those raise even more questions. So that's always fantastic, and we're here to answer them. So I just want to quickly introduce myself. As Olly said, I have a PhD in humanities, and I have some other degrees, and there's information about this online if you want to look me up. The important thing about all these degrees that I have is that I almost didn't make it to the end, and the reason why is because I was absolutely overwhelmed with information that I had to study, and I had to get it not just sort of in my mind, I had to get it with great specificity in my mind, and I was struggling with all kinds of things that are even more deadly and dangerous than information overload. There was depression and lack of concentration, and really not even being able to function properly because of medicines and all this sort of stuff. So I was really in a bad spot when I discovered mnemonics. And mnemonics is kind of a umbrella term for memory techniques. So any kind of memory technique is a mnemonic, but there's one particular kind of mnemonic that is very, very wonderful and amazing and really bulletproof of them all, and that's the Memory Palace. And Memory Palace is premised upon the idea that locations are perfect for storing information because we remember naturally so well locations in our minds. And in the document that I sent you that you can read for backing up what we're talking about today, you'll learn more about Simonides and the Western invention of the Memory Palace, and there's certainly an Eastern version of that as well, with Buddhist rituals and the like. But the real important thing is that our minds naturally remember locations very, very well. And so if you think about where you grew up and where you went to school, you can call that to mind really easily. You can call it probably better to mind than the national anthem of your country, because of this strength of the location, the spatial part of your memory in your mind. So that's what this is all premised upon. And so I call this location-based mnemonics, and it's just part of the whole approach to memory techniques that I've really focused on to get the most out of locations, because I find that in all the memory trainings, it's really just taught but not really focused on. And so we use locations, and they're always available to us, and we can always have new memory palaces under construction as we're using ones that we're familiar with. Now, as we're going through, you've got that piece of paper, and I suggest that you jot down a list of all the buildings you can think of throughout your life, and these can include homes of your relatives, homes you've lived in, schools, churches, shopping malls, libraries, museums, and art galleries, etc., and even movie theaters. And you just focus on places that you have a positive association with, and start getting a list, because all of these are perfect as memory palaces once you know these techniques. So just to take something that we all recognize, which is a home, I want to suggest to you that when you make a memory palace, you want to collect a series of stops or locations inside of the memory palace, what I often refer to as stations. And so stations are things like the tub and the mirror and the sink. And I'm going to move through this house in a clockwise fashion, and there's a reason for that I'll talk about in a minute. But some of the other stations would be the drawer, the left bedside table, the right bedside table, and so forth. And then here we have a sofa and another sofa and a window and another window. And then we come over here and we have all the parts that you would expect in a normal kitchen. And then we have a doorway, and this front hallway has a kicker table, as they call it in Germany, and all kinds of other things. And all of these places are stations, and we can create memories, create visual imagery in those areas in our minds, and then revisit it later, because we have a path. We have a direct way to move from place to place in our imagination and pick up what we've left. It's like Hansel and Gretel leaving crumbs so they can find their way back home, and that's basically the principle here.
Okay.
So
let me just ask you a quick question there, Anthony, just for the benefit of being completely clear. So at the moment we're talking about locations, and we're setting up this location in our mind. Does it matter at this point what it is that we want to remember? So whether we want to memorize foreign language vocabulary or I don't know, telephone numbers, does it matter at this stage what we're trying to remember?
It does and it doesn't. I really encourage people to have all kinds of memory palaces available, at least a dozen or so, because it does matter that the information you're memorizing there gels in a certain way so that you're not pushing or fighting or struggling. And you'll find sometimes that information just doesn't go with certain memory palaces. But if you have more memory palaces available, then you can use them. And if you ever find that sort of resistance, then you just switch to another memory palace. But by the same token, one doesn't want to get too involved with the information, because information is information. It's data. Just like your computer only sees zeros and ones, you can see information as just information, and you massage it into imagery so that you're just transcoding it or encoding it and then decoding it. And so I think that'll become clear as we go along. But
Okay.
we're gonna both shock ourselves with information and be completely clinical about it at the same time. So that we're going to get into that. But for now, just thinking about the foundations of a memory palace. Sorry, Ollie, did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's crack on.
Okay, so I just wanted to show you how this works by, this is a little bit private, but this is a place that I used to work. It was sort of an office, and I did a lot of dream recall experiments on that bed. And if we look through this room, we can see a very good example of a memory palace, and I've used it many, many times for different things, because each of these elements in the room is a station in a memory palace. So I can place a memory on the bed, on the desk, on the chair, right beside the wall, on the bike. And just as I was showing you in that graphic image of a home, all of that clockwise journey that I showed you is exactly what you would do in a real location that you've based your memory palace on. And the reason why is because you want to make a brain dead simple journey where you're not crossing your own path and you're not expending any unnecessary mental energy on what comes next along the journey, because you want all of your imagination to be focused on creating images that's going to let you recall important information, because as I was saying, you encode it so you can decode it later. And so this principle of having a linear journey is very, very important. And you can see this is just brain dead simple. I don't have 12 or 15 or 25 stations. I don't have that music stand as a station, for example, and the lamp isn't a station and the poster isn't a station, because that just gets to be too much. But I have a liberal amount here that's manageable, and I don't have to spend any mental energy thinking about what comes next after the bed. I just know it's the desk and the chair and the wall and the bike. So when we use memory palaces to store information, here's where we get into how we're actually going to store the information. We want to use imagery, and the principle behind all memory techniques is that we associate information that is abstract to us or that is unfamiliar to us, that's difficult to learn, with things that we do know. And so the memory palace is always something that we already know. It's a structure that we can lay down other information on. And I'm going to use here Kenneth Branagh, who I really, really admire as an actor, and he was a very memorable guy as Hamlet, except for to show you how you can create such vivid and intense imagery in your mind. We're not going to really talk about Hamlet as such, but we're going to talk about Hamlet of soy cupcake. And so you can see that in order to make information stick, we need crazy images, and this is just a visualization of what that imagery can look like. And I just want to use a foreign language example to show you how this works, bringing crazy imagery together along with a memory palace in order to help recall information. So this is the inside of that hotel that I showed you a picture of before with the under construction sign, and now we're doing under construction. We're building a memory palace. And when I was first looking at Spanish and starting to learn it, one of the things you have to do is conjugate certain verbs, and it's really difficult sometimes to get that stuff to stick, even if it's just small words, and sometimes when it's especially small words. And so to say in Spanish I am, you say yo soy or yo soy, depending on the sort of pronunciation of the area that you want to be talking in. And this is just completely difficult to get. So what I did is I thought, okay, I need to come up with something. So I had yo-yo, and I picked this figure, Hamlet or Kenneth Branagh, and I just stuck a yo-yo sticking out of his head so that I would always remember that I, in whenever it's actually used, is yo. And then to say I am is yo soy, so I pictured him throwing that that yo-yo at the soy milk so that I can remember yo soy. And then the next thing when you conjugate a verb is to say you are. And so in Spanish that is tu eres. And to get that in my mind, I just put a tutu on Hamlet now, and he is holding this sign that reminds me of Aries, the constellation, and so that enables me to remember that. And you can go through all of the different parts, he is, they are, and so forth, and just come up with images for them. And it's very, very quick. Something that sometimes takes people several hours over a number of days can be done in 5 minutes. So the whole thing here about using Kenneth Branagh or Hamlet is that he's a bridging figure. And when you want to memorize any sort of list of things, medical terminology or whatever kind of things that go with your profession, you can link them together not only along a memory palace journey, but with an imaginative figure that moves from place to place. So it could be Kenneth Branagh, it could be Michel Foucault, who's a French philosopher, or it could be Eric Clapton. And you just want to make a journey that rests upon things you already know. So you already know the memory palace, and then you already know who these characters are. So you just need to have them engaged in activities or associated with things that help you recall the sound and the meaning of the target information. So that's a quick example from the world of language learning. And again, it's just a matter of constructing a journey that you know intimately well, and then using information that you already know to link with things that, like soy as am, is just completely two different things. But I link it to soy milk, and I link it to the yo-yo, and it just becomes so much more clear, and I make it very vivid and bright and crazy in my imagination because he's throwing this yo-yo at it, and it suddenly becomes very, very familiar very quickly.
I was gonna ask. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the kind of vividness there, because I mean, for someone looking in on this, on what you just described from the outside, it looks kind of crazy, doesn't it? You've got these big bright colors, and you've got cupcakes and yo-yos and soy milk, and you're thinking, what the hell's going on, right? So I guess there's a reason that you're using these kind of crazy, vibrant images.
Yeah, it's essentially to shock myself so that when I go back, and we're going to talk about how to actually recall this stuff in a moment, but when I go back, it's not, well, what was that, and I have to reconstruct it. I don't want to spend too much time reconstructing it. I just want to see it, and the way that you make yourself see it, and I'm not talking about high definition television in your eyelids. I'm talking about just conceptually seeing and maybe visually seeing in your imagination what that was. And so it's just yo-yo smashing soy milk, and that is enough to trigger that construction in the Spanish language. And so it's really a kind of rubberneck effect, like you would see a car accident and you just turn your head and look. By default, your nature has look at that in it. So you rig this, you manufacture the rubberneck effect in your mind. And this is pretty simple to do. A lot of people are worried about this, and they think, well, I'm not imaginative, I'm not creative. But the truth is that you just get started and you'll get very good at it very soon. And I'm going to give you an exercise about that in just a second so that you can really get started on becoming more imaginative and creative in your mind, and get going with this if you have any feeling that you're not capable of it. And
Yeah, well, just one thing, if I may, Anthony, just one thing I want to just chip in with there is that I know, like, when you're in terms of learning foreign language vocabulary, I know that, I mean, a lot of people will instinctively use imagery and mnemonics and word association and things like that. I found that since we started talking about this stuff, and I started learning some of the techniques that you use, I found that since I started to make my word associations and my visualizations much more intense and kind of graphic and bright and strong, that made a huge difference on my ability to actually remember words. Before, I think a lot of my imagery was quite bland, but the moment that I sort of took your lead and actually started making these really strong, intense visualizations to link to these words I was trying to remember, I noticed a really big difference in my ability to actually remember them later on.
Yeah, it's really the difference between light and day, and it's something that we need to catch ourselves when we're using these techniques. Is this really big and bright and vivid and filled with action enough to catch our attention later when we're going back to find target information. And so if you want the troubleshooting guide at the back of the user's manual, that's one of the big ones. Is that information, or is that imagery attached to the information big and bright and visual enough so that you're able to recall it just simply?
Yeah.
And I'm very glad to hear that you've intensified your approach to that, because it just makes a huge difference.
Yeah, this is a really it's really huge. This, so yeah, thanks for making that point.
Yeah, and speaking of, making sure that your images are very vivid and filled with action and so forth, here's a quick exercise for you. What you want to do is make a list of all the people that you can think of, or a substantial number. So when I was preparing this, came to mind Brad Pitt, Joan Rivers, Barack Obama, and the Canadian Devil, which is in the South Park series, which you may or may not have seen. Which is while I'm mentioning that, watching cartoons is a very good way to make yourself more visual in your imagination. But nonetheless, make a list of figures, people famous for being famous, politicians, and so forth, and just collect them in an Excel file, and then make a list of objects in the next column, and then some action words, and then reaction words. So what I've done here is just gotten jump, slap, and kiss as some example verbs, and then some reactions would be defense, threaten, and shove. And so basically in my mind, I just see Brad Pitt jumping on Joan Rivers, and then Joan Rivers is defending back with giant nail clippers, and Joan Rivers is then slapping Barack Obama, and Obama threatens her with a hot iron, and the Barack then kisses the Canadian Devil, and the Canadian Devil shoves him into a Canadian fridge. Now, these aren't connected to any information at all. They're just exercises to help when the time comes to memorize stuff, so that my visual creativity and your visual creativity is much stronger than it would be otherwise. So think of this kind of exercise, collecting figures, collecting objects, putting them in action with one another, and having a reaction, as like a boxer in the boxing ring skipping. You don't see the skipping when they're fighting in the ring and punching each other in a boxing match, but all that time they put in skipping is really a huge part of their game. So, and I'm not talking about a lot of time for this. I'm talking maybe 5 times in the beginning over a month, and just drill yourself, and you'll get very, very, very good at coming up with images just on the fly. So all of that said, I want to give you some very, very foolproof ways to make top-notch memory palaces, in case that you're still wondering, well, how am I going to do this? And, well, first of all, I suggest you have a piece of paper, and so you draw the memory palace out. And so here's from a student of the magnetic memory method, and he's just done a really wonderful job. And you can see that he's numbered all the stations, and he's followed this principle of having a linear journey. There's some curves and twists here and there, but if you find number 1, you'll see that he's got a clockwork path in that one room, and then he's moving around in a more or less linear order, and he's had great success with this memory palace. So drawing is a major way to create a good one, and you're externalizing it, and as you work on your internal spatial memory, and this is a very powerful exercise, and you do this with more than one memory palace, because as I said, you want to get a bunch going for yourself. You can also use your computer. Now, this is less hands-on than drawing, and it has different cognitive effects. But if you don't feel like drawing, use a computer. And here's another student of the magnetic memory method who has been studying some language, doing some language study, and he just did it on his computer. One of the most successful students that I have has integrated drawing with photographs. And so what you see here is an actual journey that's drawn out, and she's used stickers to highlight where the stations are in her memory palace, and then taken photographs of where this is as just part of the exercise of creating it. And now she's going to use all this in her mind. She's not going to look at this later, but this really makes it strong in her mind. And you'll notice on the left, she's got a top-down list of all the stations as well, which is another great thing to do in order to really cement that journey in your mind. So it can be quite a complex journey with, here she has 35 different stations, but to really get that solid and simple, you can write it down, and you also add this to an Excel file as well. Now that seems like it might be a lot of steps, but really if you don't go with the photographs, I build memory palaces all the time in 5 minutes and less. I just built one last night when I was sitting in a restaurant and started memorizing some phrases, and it just works great, even with loud noise around and everything. So these are 3 ways: drawing, using your computer, and taking photographs to integrate with the drawing. Now, I've got this cartoon here that says all dressed up without the slightest idea why. And the reason is because some people are really, really good at creating memory palaces, and they're really good at creating all these crazy images, but they can't remember what the images mean. And so, that can be a pretty perplexing and painful situation to be in. And so what we need to do is spend a bit of time practicing recall, so that when we look at those images, we actually can decode them and get the information back that we use the images for. And we want to be able to do it really, really fast, so that we're not humming and hawing for that information. So what we want to do is practice the memory palace in a very particular way once we've put in some information. And do you recognize this, Ollie?
I do. This is my flat in Cairo.
Yeah, so, and thank you for letting me use this for this part of the training. The reason why I've put these numbers on there is I want to suggest to you that when you're practicing this, in order to maximize the benefit and speed up your recall and the accuracy of your recall, you mentally travel your memory palace and decode the images that you've created in that linear order, but then also go backwards in your mind. And then start at the center. So start at, say, station 4 and go from 4 to 8, and then go from, say, 4 to 1. And so that you're moving from the different points towards different entrances and exits. And that will really solidify how that you're able to go from information to information. So let's say phrase to phrase, or one term to another term, or a mathematical formula to another mathematical formula. Not just forward, but forward and back, and from the middle out and the middle in.
So just very quickly, just to make it crystal clear for anyone who's maybe new to this. So just to kind of recap the steps that we've gone through. We started off with a list of things that we potentially want to memorize, and then we've attached this vivid imagery to each of these things that we want to memorize, to make it easier to give it some kind of meaning, so that we can remember them. And then what we're doing is we're taking each of these words or things, and we're placing one thing in an individual place around the room. Is that right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So then we're going to in our mind we're going to go from one place, or one station as you call it, to the next, and in each station we're going to visually in our minds find that thing that we are trying to remember.
Right, and then we decode it.
Decode it meaning we'll remember when we arrive at a particular station, we're seeing an image, and then from that image we're going back to the original thing we're trying to remember. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. And to practice that, we want to actually revisit the memory palace and walk that journey and decode each one, or unpack each image, so that we are essentially, what we're doing is we're getting that information into long-term memory, so we don't need the memory palace anymore. And Ebbinghaus, who was a great pioneer in memory, he talked about the forgetting curve and the recency effect. So we're often very good at recalling what we have encountered first and what we have encountered last, and the middle seems to sag. And I thought about that a long time, and it's also something that happens when you use mnemonics. You tend to remember the first 2 or 3 mnemonics that you created really well, and the last one's really well, but there's this sag in the middle. And so I thought, there's got to be a way to get over this, and that's why that I started going forward and back, and then starting from the middle and going to the back from the middle, and also skipping stations. So 1, 3, 5, 7, and then 8, 6, 4, 2. And the reason why you're doing that is because you're basically doing spaced repetition software in your mind, where you see things out of order, and that strengthens your memory, because it gets rid of this forgetting curve phenomenon, because you're not falling for the recency effect or the primacy effect. You're actually encountering the information equally at the first moment, in even in even amounts. So that's a really, really powerful technique for making sure that you recall that information easily without even really needing that memory palace. And once you get into this, it's very, very quick. We're talking sometimes 5 minutes for 5 phrases, and then going through this in your mind a couple times the next day, and then once or twice over the week, and then maybe once or twice a month for afterwards. But if you're learning a language, for example, and you're reading, writing, speaking, and listening every single day, then that's going to go much faster, and you won't even really need to do it that long. But in order to overcome that forgetting curve, this is what I highly, highly recommend. And not only will you remember things much better and recall it with greater speed and accuracy, but you'll also just become much more capable with memory techniques like this, and you'll become more imaginative, and you'll just feel better because it's a great mental exercise. So that's really a very, very condensed version of how to do all of this. You just need to pick the information that you want to memorize and start working with it based on memory palaces that you've built. And again, I just mentioned in language learning, reading, writing, and speaking and listening. And this is these are some of the activities that no one wants to do, but that's really essential. You should never memorize anything that you're not going to use, because otherwise, what's the point of having it in your memory? And it's not just about language learning. Anything that you're studying, be it math or something for your profession, you should be reading, writing, and speaking and listening to that as well in order to use what you've memorized. So you could just write an email to someone, or write an email to yourself that no one else is going to read, where you describe from memory what it is that you learned, and that you are also reading in your subject, so you encounter those words and talk to somebody about what you've learned, and even tell them how that you memorized it, and then listen to podcasts that relate to your subject area, or watch a movie. Even if you're studying medicine and you don't want to watch documentaries about medicine, you can go watch a movie that involves doctors and or lawyers if you're studying law, but be in the context of what you're memorizing, so that you're using that information and you're thinking about it. So if you're watching a movie based on a John Grisham novel, or reading a novel, you can laugh and snicker when he gets it all wrong, because you're recalling from your memory what you've learned. And so this is an essential step, is to actually use the information that you've memorized. And
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add something there. I think that's a really important point, because what we're not saying here, just to be clear, is that we're not saying that you would use memory palaces as an entire language learning strategy. But I mean, we keep coming back to language learning. I think it's one of the things that most interests the people on this particular call. But I guess it would apply to anything, like you say, because everything exists in context, right? So we're not saying that you would spend your days solely creating memory palaces and learning, random lists of vocabulary. This is a technique for remembering things that are not sticking, but that you would very much like to stick, right? And when I first started experimenting with this, this was sort of my reservation. Is that, well, this sounds like it. This sounds like it. Might take a very long time, and it does take a bit of time to put together your first memory palace, to kind of map out those different stations in your head. But you see, what I found was, I was learning Arabic at the time, and I was finding it a really hard language, and there were lots of things that just weren't sticking. And so, what I did was I had a list of all these words that for some reason I could just not remember. And I distilled them down into, I just took them 10 words at a time, and I took 10 words that I thought would be really useful, and I thought, okay, I'd really like to be able to remember these words. They weren't sticking with any other method I was using, and so by using a memory palace, I was able to finally just get to grips with these words and put them to bed. And then this is happening in amongst a much wider strategy, so I'm spending time reading and listening and doing all the other things that I should be doing, but what we've got here is a way of very effectively learning some targeted set of things that you need to remember. Does that make sense, Anthony?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think anyone should be put off that maybe their first memory palace takes a bit of time to create, and just getting into this to create these images seems like maybe it's going to be a bit of a struggle. Just get in there and do it, because this is absolutely going to blow your mind. And I hear from people all the time that they finally just went and tried it, and they could not believe how that it went. Like in my French speaking group, the person who's the MC usually, she said, I finally tried it and I could not believe that in half an hour I knew the entire Greek alphabet. And I kind of joked, oh, it took you that long, but that's pretty impressive. And I remember when I studied some of the Japanese characters, some people said, oh, it took you an hour and a half to completely memorize them. But I thought that was really impressive because for me, if I was doing it any other way with spaced repetition software, these characters that have absolutely no meaning and trying to figure out how they sound, I would have given up, but this is so much fun and it involves all parts of my imagination that an hour and a half, I think, for, more than 50 characters is really, really amazing. Being able to know how they sound, being able to basically write them out correctly, that's incredible results from just, a memory palace that took 5 minutes to build.
Yeah, and so from my own experience as someone who came at this new, I would say it took me probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a quarter to create this memory palace and to come up with the imagery for these 10 words. It was 10 verbs, 10 Arabic verbs that I wanted to remember. It probably took me about an hour and a quarter. But by the time I'd put together the memory palace, I'd come up with the imagery, I'd put all these words in the different stations and practice kind of walking back and forth in my mind a few times. Okay, it took me an hour and a quarter, but those words have stuck and I remember them to this day. And when I think about how long it would have taken me through any other means to remember those words, it's absolutely no contest. And so what I've been able to do is move on with my language learning, knowing those 10 verbs, and I use them now in virtually every single conversation that I have. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind and to remember how efficient it is in the long term, because if you do this properly and you take the time to create those really vivid images, they're not, you're not going to forget them.
Right. And a huge part of it is really spending a small amount of time being strategic about what it is that you need to learn. So often people they go to memory techniques because they want to pack in everything in the universe relating to whatever they're studying. But that's not necessarily the best way to do it. I mean, when I was in university, I used to go to the professor and say, look, between you and me, what's really going to be on this test? Or I would actually often go and present what I thought was going to be on the test and get them to sort of highlight. And that's how you know what to memorize. That's one way to know how you memorize. And if you're learning a language, you get a speaking partner who you can say, how do I say, my opinion is, or, where's the bank? And then you get these essential kinds of phrases that you're going to need. And then that's what you memorize, but not necessarily everything under the sun. So you can bring selectivity to this game and get a lot farther, a lot faster. So the reason why that I have this image here of the meditating monk and the, let's say, Zen archer is because a lot of the reason why people don't get success is because they are working with memory techniques when they're stressed out, when they're in a rush, and when they just simply haven't got a sort of inner stillness. So I really teach very, 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 very often the principle of just being relaxed, and just sitting for 5 minutes to prepare your imagination is going to make all the difference in the world. So you have a bit of inner stillness and quiet, because at the most sophisticated level, which is very, very quick to achieve, to be perfectly honest. I mean, there are stories of people who learned about the World Memory Championships in 3 months before they went and became a Grandmaster of Memory. So we're not talking about a huge investment of time before you reach this highest level. But at the highest level, it really is like being an archer. And you have targets. Those targets are your stations in your memory palace. You have arrows, which is the information that you want to stick on the targets. And this sort of Zen approach, which is knocking that arrow on the bow, pulling back the drawstring and letting it fly and letting it hit that target so that it sticks and it's there when you want to go and retrieve the arrow. And it'll be there if you want to go retrieve the arrow, a year later. And so long as you do these exercises and practice recall, you're going to be able to do that. And being relaxed brings so much greater ease to it. And the ultimate benefit of being relaxed while you practice is you can anchor that relaxation so that when you're in that situation where you need to recall, you can also recall in a state of relaxation because you have associated your memorization with relaxation. And of course, you can practice memorization being relaxed in front of your dog and tell your family that you're going to work from reciting from your memory and build up to being relaxed in more pressing situations like in an exam. So that's a really key element here, and I think you'll find much, much greater results if you just get relaxed before you do any of this, and that includes creating your memory palaces. So I just wanted to end on that note by by giving you this quote that I really, really like, which is, never, ever, under any circumstances, doubt your ability to learn, to figure things out, and to add value to others. And at the end of the day, it's that final phrase that's so important, is when you learn something and when you've got it figured out, you want to be teaching somebody else. So once you've developed this superpower for yourself, be sure to share it with another person, because you really only learn by teaching. You know something at the highest possible level after you've taught it. So don't doubt your ability to learn this. Get it figured out and then make sure that you pass it on, because that's the path to true mastery with your memory to whatever object or subject that you want to apply it to.
Fantastic. Well, Anthony, that was quite a presentation. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for all the work you put into putting it together. Yeah, I mean, all I can say is, from my point of view, when I first started dabbling around with these techniques, I mean, my memory hasn't been the same since. I keep discovering new techniques and new ways to apply this stuff every single day. So yeah, as Anthony says, I really encourage you to sort of spend a bit of time getting to grips with this and try to apply it, try to use it, because it will give you results that you didn't know were possible. And yeah, that's fantastic. We're going to take questions, because I'm sure there will be some. Go ahead and type in any questions you've got. If you can find the chat box somewhere in your console, feel free to ask anything you'd like. We're here. We're going to stay on the call as long as we need to answer all your questions. So let's just give people a couple of seconds to type in what they'd like to ask, and we'll try and take these in some kind of order. Now, the first thing. Okay, before we do that, let's talk about London, because we have put together an event. It's going to be a live event, and it's coming up pretty soon on July the 4th and July the 5th in London. So apologies to those of you outside the UK or outside of Europe, perhaps, because London's not actually that far from many places in Europe. If you've enjoyed this presentation, if you would like to learn more about memory techniques, if you would like to spend an entire day with us being walked through these techniques step by step, we'd love to have you come and join us in London on July the 4th or July the 5th. It's going to be a really unforgettable day. We're going to start with some of the basics. We're going to walk you through step by step what's going on. If you'd like to get some more information about that, have we got a link somewhere, Anthony, for people to click?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be appearing now, and you're welcome to click it and register for this event. I just would say that you have more than enough now to get started with this, but one of the problems that I hear from so many people is they say, oh, this is so fantastic, but I never actually do these exercises. I never sit down and build memory palaces. I never do this, collecting different names of celebrities and working them through in my mind. I never implement. And so that's what this event really is all about. We're going to go through some of these topics in greater detail, to train you more, but also just get you to implement. We're got worksheets, we've got exercises we're going to share with each other, and there's going to be laughter because a lot of this stuff is crazy, and we're all going to walk out of there feeling so much more confident about our ability to memorize, and you're going to feel just absolutely amazed by what's possible at the end of a single day because you've sat down and gone beyond theory, gone beyond reading the books, gone beyond attending webinars like this, gone beyond taking video courses, listening to audio programs, and you've actually sat down and created more than one memory palace like I suggest you always do. You've actually sat down and built a foundation for the kinds of images that you're going to need, and you've got an actual session of practicing recall, and there's no stress or pressure in that. It's just going to be fun, and it's just an absolute necessity to sit down and do this stuff, to implement what you've learned.
It's about actually doing it, isn't it? I mean I was lucky enough to have, I think I spent like an hour, maybe an hour and a half with you a couple of months back, and I got so much out of just that hour and a half. So just imagine what's possible in an entire day of this stuff. Yeah, it's going to be absolutely fantastic. Just to be clear, the July the 4th and July the 5th, those are two separate workshops, so it's not the whole weekend. July the 4th is a Saturday, July the 5th is a Sunday. You can attend either day. It's going to be exactly the same content. We've got a wonderful venue as well in Russell Square in central London. It's a really nice room with a sort of garden patio. Yeah, it's going to be great. So just click the button for more information, and we will send it over to you. Right, we've got a few questions. Anything else you'd like to add about that, Anthony, before we dive into the questions?
I would only say, if you're going to come, think about the kinds of information that you really want to focus on memorizing, and spend a little time just writing a paragraph or so talking about your frustrations and any myths that you have about your memory. It's often something that we don't do is think about, well, why don't we have such a good, or what is it that's wrong with my memory, and what might I have learned over my life from other people, like hearing your parents say, oh, my memory is so bad, and how might that have attached itself to you. So think about what you want to memorize, and think about your history with memory, what you've heard, what kinds of things you've told yourself, what kind of things you've heard other people say, and that general atmosphere about the beliefs about memory that have been around you. And then we can talk about that and try and get rid of that stuff, because at the end of the day, no one has any better memory than anybody else. It's just a matter of training and implementing what you've learned from the training, and there is no such thing as a bad memory. And the more we can analyze and think about what it is that how we think about our memories, then we can change how we think, and then these approaches really sink in, and that's when they get really fun. So that's all I would add.
Yeah, and also just to think about what's possible, if you could, if you really could take your memory up to the next level. I'm a pretty experienced language learner myself, and even now, I found new levels of possibility with this. So I just encourage all people to also think about just what would be possible in your life if you really could take control of your memory and start to literally be able to remember anything that you need to. I mean, for your life and for your work, there are so many possibilities. And I'm just looking to the questions. Funnily enough, the first question we've got in is about an event that you did last year. So Anthony, you did an event last year, and how is this event different from the last one? Maybe you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, well, the last event was in Vienna, at the University of Vienna, actually, and it was really, really great. There was also a live stream, and about 500 people were there and around the world. And, well, we didn't do these exercises. We just went through a 8-hour version of what you've just heard, going really deep into all the nuts and bolts that you will learn in London. But we didn't actually sit down and do any exercises. We didn't build any memory palaces together. You didn't have me to look at the memory palace you drew and give you some pointers right on the spot. And we didn't do any of this visual exercises to make your mind much more vibrant and powerful. And I mean, what we talked about today is just the beginning of what you can do with your imagination in order to really pump it up. There's so much more to explore, and we're going to implement that. And the other thing is that people weren't able to talk with one another. There weren't there wasn't an opportunity to make lifelong friends and start a mastermind group, so to speak, with each other. And I've already set up a Facebook group for the members here to get together after and keep talking about this. And of course, I'll be in the mastermind group as well, and on Facebook. And the other thing that's really special and unique to this event is that there's going to be an 8-week email follow-up sequence with some additional videos and some additional audios and material that will not, it's not just that I'm going to leave you at the end of this day and goodbye, I hope you implement this stuff. I'm going to follow up with you for 8 weeks with more encouragement, more information, and ask you to email me back and see how you're doing. So this isn't just a one-shot event. I'm going to follow up with you, and that makes this very, very unique. So it's Magnetic Memory live and live again. So we're going to keep going, and the opportunity to learn and implement is going to continue. So that makes this very, very unique compared to the one last year.
Thanks for that. So we've got a bunch more questions. Anthony, why don't I hand over to you now, and you can kind of take these questions as you in the order that you think best.
One of the really interesting questions that has come up is that the question of age, and if anybody is too old to use their memory, and how that they can, preserve their memory for the lifetime of moving towards old age, and how you can prepare for that. And one of the things you can do that's really wonderful is just to get started using these memory techniques, because they're very, very healthy, and they completely will absolutely set the stage for brain health throughout your life. Because when you're using unassisted imagination to memorize information, you're doing much more exercise for your brain and for your mind than you would if you just did crossword puzzles, or if you just did any sort of thing that's traditional, Sudoku, or these kinds of puzzles that people play. That's wonderful, of course, but you're getting so much more brain health when you're doing what I would call unassisted, imaginative memory work and mental work, because there is absolutely a big difference between having a pencil in your hand and writing in response to a puzzle that someone else has created, and selecting your own material that you want to memorize, and keep on going, keep on using your imagination as you age, so that you do not ever lose what you've got already now. And if you feel that right now you're already sort of losing your cognitive faculties, just start with what you have. Keep using what you already have and develop it, build it, because that's going to enable you to get better and better and better. So the idea that you get old and you lose your mental abilities just absolutely is false. You can always, at any point in your life, start using what you have right now and develop it. And so one of the things that I would suggest is just to complete some of the exercises that we have talked about today. Draw memory pals, start creating lists of actors and actions and nouns and phrases, and see these things in your mind, practice seeing them in your mind. And this is an absolute wonderful thing, and you can start doing it at any time, and no matter what age you're at, you'll be able to develop your imaginative abilities and your memory. Now, Helen is asking, what is one of my strongest visual images that I use? The strongest things that I use are always based on things that I already know. So this comes down to actors, and it comes down to cartoon characters. I think that everybody who has seen The Simpsons knows this picture of Homer Simpson with his hands around Bart Simpson's throat, throttling him. And that's a good example of being able to rely upon something that you've seen before and use that vibrancy, that crazy action, that exaggerated over the top attack against another cartoon human that you'd never want to see in real life, someone being treated that way. But it's very, very vibrant. So I love using cartoon actions like that, and I've used Homer Simpson in memory palaces before. I've used Al Pacino, Abraham Lincoln, and Al Pacino and Abraham Lincoln have different strengths because I've never seen Abraham Lincoln the way that I've seen Al Pacino, and it really, really makes a huge difference if the person you've seen them move. So you could use Abraham Lincoln as portrayed by some actors in movies, and that might be better. But because basically what's happening is you have to build more action for Abraham Lincoln than you do for, say, Al Pacino or Homer Simpson, because you don't have that same vocabulary that you would if you are using things that you've been watching your whole life. So Star Wars is full of great images. And the second part to this question, to the answer, is that the best and strongest images that I use are the ones that work, and that's what I always focus on. So whenever they're not working, I go back and I just compound and make the images stronger and stronger. So we got a question from Andrew, who says he'd like to increase his French vocab from 6,000 words to 8,000 words. And how does he use the memory palaces? One big one or lots of small ones? Well, this kind of question is going to answer a lot of questions that people have. The reality is that if you really want to succeed with this, you need lots of memory palaces, and you need to develop the ability to reuse the memory palaces that you have. And also, I would suggest that when you're thinking about thousands and thousands of words, which is fantastic, and it's great, Andrew, that you have 6,000 words already, there's a kind of thing that you need to ask yourself, and is that, do you need 2,000 words right now? As Olly always points out, and it's a wonderful suggestion, is focus on what you need now. And what you need now probably isn't 2,000 words. But what I do when I'm working on improving my German is I pick a book, and it's often a very challenging book. So I'm reading Thomas Mann right now, Dr. Faustus, and it's a very challenging book. But I don't say I want to memorize every word in this book that I don't know. What I say is I'm going to pick 3 interesting words per page, and I'm going to memorize those. And so I figure out in advance that I'm going to read 10 pages today, 3 words per page. So I need 30 stations in a memory palace. And so I build that out, and then I get to work. I read the pages, and then I sort of just strike a line underneath 3 words that really interest me, or I write them down on another piece of paper, and then I look them up in the dictionary and I memorize them, and then I go back. I don't read the entire 10 pages again, but I look at the sentences that contain those words and see them in context, and then they're effectively memorized. And then going out and using them, writing an email to someone in German and using those words in my own sentences that I've created around them. And then I have all kinds of opportunities to speak German every day and start using them in sentences, and then keep on reading, keep on watching movies, and then you encounter them. It's like opening a door and light shines through, and it's just as simple as that. And it's just by focusing on the words that I need right now, based on my goal of reading Thomas Mann at a much higher level. So that is my suggestion for you, is to have small memory palaces, say 30 words at a time, or it could be 10 words or 15 words, or even just 5 words. There are some days when I just memorize 3 phrases, and that's an amazing achievement. And so this is what I would suggest, is to pack the most that you can from thinking small numbers, and you'll soon find that you have reached way more than you could ever need, and you'll reach that goal of 2,000 words much quicker by concentrating on the nuclear power of small numbers. Now, the question about essential tips for first-time memory palace builders from Ricardo is really, really great. First-time memory palace builders is to do what I've suggested in this session, is to draw out a memory palace and have 10 stations minimum, and probably keep it to 10 stations maximum. And it's really, really important that you draw them out and create a top-down list. And top-down list means that you have numbered the stations. Your stations are in a linear path and you don't cross your own path, and you go outwards. You don't go into the memory palace so that you run into a dead end, but you go outwards. That frees the imagination so much and allows you to just know that you can add more stations later. And then walk the memory palace in your mind a couple times. Walk it from the beginning to the end, walk it from the end to the beginning, walk from the middle to the end and the middle to the beginning, and in your mind from stations 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. And this is going to make it a much stronger memory palace in your mind. And that is absolutely, absolutely going to be fantastic. And so another question is about the times for our event in London, and it starts at 10 a.m. and we go till 6 p.m. And this is going to have a lunch break, and so an hour lunch break, but 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it's going to be a great time as we work on these together. And there'll be a bit of flexibility and so forth, because we're going to be working on exercises and implementing them, so that time that we spend is a bit elastic, because I want to make sure that you get the most out of the event and that I have time to look at what you're working on and actually guide you individually. That's why we have so few seats available for the live sessions, because I want to be able to attend everybody who is there with great attention on everything that you're working on and your goals, so that you are able to achieve what you want and implement and have that individual guidance. So 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Now, Nima is asking, can we use a particular memory palace multiple times? This connects back to the question about how tips for beginners. And the truth is that you can, and you can get very, very good at using memory palaces multiple times. But I suggest that you get good at just using one memory palace first and using it well, and then building at least 10 and using 10 before you even start trying to reuse any of them. And a lot of people will probably think, well, I don't want to build 10. But here's the thing. You learn so much about memory palaces by building more than one. And so when you build your 10th palace, then you're going to be so much stronger when you move on to the 11th. If you just do one and then a second one, well, that second one's not going to be nearly as strong as it could be. So you want to develop a bit of strength in the memory palace building stage in and of itself, and then using all of the memory palaces that you've built and building strength in those as well. And then once you've, say, gotten 10, which is a nice round number that I recommend, you want to spend time thinking about how you're going to approach reusing them. And that's a bit of a longer topic, but basically you want to mentally cleanse them and think about how that you can avoid something called ghosting. Or if you have ghosting, which is essentially bumping up into bumping against your old images and having them confuse the new stuff you're trying to memorize, what you can do is actually, instead of cleansing that stuff out, you can find ways to attach the new memories to those ghosts. So, but that's advanced stuff. Get the groundworks first. Get a good 10 palaces rolling and have 10 pieces of information in each of those 10 palaces. That's 100 pieces of information, which is really going to blow your mind. And once you reach that stage, then start thinking about reusing them. Now, Chris is asking, can a memory palace station contain a complete verb conjugation or a single he/she conjugation? When you are much more advanced than, or you don't even have to be that advanced, you can start trying it. But this is, I would say, a little bit on the advanced side. So I would start by having 5 or 6 stations, depending on how many conjugations you need. And that, I mean, he/she is definitely one that you could do together, but it depends how advanced you are. For myself, when I'm doing verb conjugations, I always do some kind of circular pattern or star pattern, and I don't try to collapse them all onto one station. And the reason is that there's also tenses that you need to work on as well, and so it gets to be too much for the mind to juggle if you don't have that space. that's another reason to build memory palaces, so you're always moving to an open area that you can add more stations. Because if your mind feels that you're trying to compress stuff too much, it's going to resist, and you're not going to get the same results. But when you have a nice wide open field, then you're going to get better results, because things can breathe, and you can massage those images into place in the memory palace. So yeah, and that's another reason to have multiple memory palaces, so that you can do that and then reuse them. So I've conjugated verbs again and again and again in the same memory palace, but giving them space to breathe. Christina asks, if you need to memorize a lot, wouldn't made-up places like in video games and movies work just as well? Well, yeah, that is an option, and it's something that I have worked with myself. At the end of the day, though, I prefer not to use video games in movies, and I've talked a lot about this on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast in different episodes. And the reason why is that when you are using a fantasy memory palace, or what I often call a virtual memory palace, you have to rebuild that memory palace every time you use it, in a way that you don't have to when you use your home or a school or a church. And that is absolutely a much stronger approach, because you're using something that's real, a place that you've been, even if you haven't been there for 20 years. You've got so much more connection to being able to access it in your mind, and so experiment with virtual memory palaces, with building them on your own, and you're going to have an absolutely amazing time doing that. But if you find that you're not getting the same results as with a real memory palace, then go back to building memory palaces based on the absolute foundations of memory palaces based on real locations. So that's fantastic to do. And we're getting another question about the times of the London event. Well, it's 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. and we're going to have lunch during that time. So, and again, I just would repeat that this is an implementation workshop. So we're going to have presentations, but a lot of the focus is going to be on helping you do the foundational exercises, so that when you walk out of the live setting, you're going to have so much of the work done. This is not going to be talking about it anymore. This is going to be building the memory palaces, building your imagination, finding all of these crazy images, and knowing how to do it, because we've done it together, and you're gonna leave with absolute certainty that you have these techniques down. Now, Manuel is asking about building palaces, movement around characters, images, and actions. What else does he need? And he answers his own question. Practice, of course, but what else? Well, it's a great question, because you do need something else. You need to be in touch with the topic that you're memorizing. So you can memorize all the stuff in the world, but if you're not involved in it, if it's not part of your soul, then why do it? You know, there's something called slave's luck, which is a lot of people, they're going to medical school or law school or whatever, and they're doing it to please somebody else. And they come to me and they're using these techniques, and they still have trouble. Now, I don't judge them or anything, but I often ask them, do you really want to go to law school? Do you really want to become a doctor? And they'll often say, yes, of course. And I can hear in their voice that they mean no. And I had this myself. I had it myself. This is one of the reasons why I know it so intimately. It's a bit of a funny story and an embarrassing one at the same time. But I was in trouble at one point. I was at the end of a research grant, and I couldn't find another teaching position at the university. The competition was so fierce, and I had 3 job interviews, and I didn't get hired for any of those. So I didn't know what I was going to do with myself, and I had to go get a job. And years ago, I had been a security, not a security guard, but a store detective. And so I wanted to get into that again. And just as a temporary job to find my feet, figure out what I was going to do, and apply to more university jobs. And so I tried to get into that field again because, I liked it. It was kind of weird and strange, but you didn't have to wear a uniform or anything, and you got to talk to the police a lot, and it was interesting. But I couldn't get into that position again, so I wound up taking security guard training, and I was using memory techniques for it, and it worked, but it wasn't sizzling the way it works for foreign languages study, which I love foreign languages, and my passion wasn't in it, so there was this sort of resistance. And so it's not the techniques that don't work, it's the passion that you have for the information that really seals the deal. And we all know that we can be very, very passionate about something, and that doesn't mean that things are going to stick, but our passion for information doesn't necessarily, help. It helps the memory techniques somehow. It's the extra gas in the memory techniques. So when you're in line with your topic, because using these techniques really is fun, and it's all that much more fun when you have fun with the information itself. When you can go to your language learning tutor and show them a new phrase, a couple of phrases that you've memorized, that's fun, and it makes everything so much more interesting and vibrant and motivating, and you want to go do more. But if you're going to memorize stuff for a job you don't really want, then you can't necessarily expect that you're going to get the same magic razzle dazzle effects, even though you can use these techniques to ace all of those exams easily. I have found personally that there's got to be passion involved in order to get the best possible results. And I'm talking about instant memorization and recall based on these techniques and tools at a much higher, faster rate that gets into your soul because of how passionate you are about the topic. So that's really, at the end of the day, the missing ingredient, is that you're memorizing things that get you where you want in life, that get you to your goals, that get you to financial freedom, that get you to intellectual achievements, and that gets you to, let's face it, to the respect of your peers. And those things only happen when you're in line with your passion. So I've made this a little bit of a long speech, and it's because I want to encourage you that when you're using memory techniques, you're applying them to something that you love, applying them to something that's going to get you to where you want to go in life, and not where somebody else wants you to go. And that's very, very important. And that's often the missing ingredient. So you can have all the tools that you want. You can have an amazing Harley Davidson, let's put it that way, and you can just love that Harley Davidson. But if you're driving it, if you're riding it to a factory that you don't want to work in, then it's not nearly as cool as it would be if you're riding it down to Spain to the beach, because you have accomplished all your financial goals, and that's all you do, is you just ride your bike to wherever you want to go. So that's really the way memory techniques work. They're like a Harley Davidson or a bike, and you just get on it and you go where you want to go. End of story. You don't take your memory and your beautiful information to a place that you don't even want to be in the first place. You go to where you want, and that's when memory techniques really start to sing. So another question is about Erin from Linguisticer. Akusha is asking, she says that another Memory Palace's low-key advocate, Erin of Linguisticator, advises not visualizing locations externally in drawing or pictures. Well, I'd be very interested in looking up why that he says that. So I don't want to comment on his advice without having read it for myself. But what I can say is that I don't feel that I would change anything, because there's a link between the hand and the mind. And so we learn things so much better when we write and involve our body. The more your body is involved, the more it's going to get into your mind. And the mind is never unassisted by the body. The mind is produced by your body. But think about actors. Actors cannot act if they don't have a script in their hands, and they cannot act if they don't have props, and they cannot act if they don't have clothes, and they cannot act if they don't have a stage. And this is really, really important, is that the idea that you shouldn't externalize something on paper is just not the way things work in the world. So again, I don't want to comment too much on it, because I'm really curious now to see what he has to say, and I'm gonna look into it, and hopefully maybe have him as a guest on my podcast, because that's just a fascinating idea, and he may have some strong rationale for it. But again, I just think that you really learn a memory palace so much better if you can externalize it. And at the end of the day, you're memorizing external information anyway. So you're going to hold a book in your hand, or you're going to hold a dictionary app in your hand. You're going to have something in your hand that's not in your body. Everything that you memorize is outside of your body. So externalization is just part of it. Now, here's a question from Billy. He says, let's say I memorize 5 items for shopping: bananas, oranges, apples, pear, and plums. I put them inside my room in linear fashion. Should these fruits stay with the microstations, or will it be way more effective if I caused these images to interact with each other, like bananas fighting with apples? Okay, so, well, here's the thing, and I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't recommend memorizing shopping list at all, because I don't think that this is a useful a way to use memory techniques, because everybody knows what they want to eat unless you're doing a complicated recipe. But so I don't quite understand the impetus behind the question. But if you want to memorize a list of anything and have the information interacting with each other, that's on a case-to-case basis. You want to absolutely use interaction between the objects if that it helps you get recall. So no matter what you're memorizing, and sorry, I don't want to sound judgmental about shopping lists, but if you've ever read through my stuff and on the podcast, I often say, you know, why spend special memory palaces that are so precious on things that you could just write down on a piece of paper? I know that sounds contrary, because you should be contradictory, because you should be using your memory palaces all the time to practice your memory. But at the same time, I'd rather have, you know, 10 foreign language phrases that I'm studying than anything. And it's just kind of an ongoing joke that if you can't remember what you're going to eat, then then by all means use it, but save the memory palaces for the good things that you want to memorize, that are going to make a difference in your life, so that you can escape slave's luck. That's what I'm trying to get at. And so the point of the objects interacting with each other, it only makes sense to the extent that you are going to have those interactions help you recall the information. So having them interact for the sake of interaction is not useful. It's only when they interact in order to assist recall that it makes sense. So to give you an example, of Peleus' son Achilles' sing, O Muse, the vengeance deep and deadly, whence to Greece unnumbered ills arose. Now, I have a number of images behind this. That incidentally is the first line of Homer's Iliad, and it's a Dryden's translation, if you look it up. The thing there is that I have everything interacting with everything, because it's a poem, and so that helps guide the lines along. That's why it's necessary for everything to interact in that case with what's on the next station, in order to get that fluidity, in order to make sure that everything flows. But if it was individual words, nouns, verbs, whatever, then I wouldn't want them to interact with one another. I'd want them to be isolated, and except for in extraordinary cases, then they could interact, but rarely ever do I have that be the case, because it's just not useful for the individual information. It's when information is connected, as in a phrase. And even then, phrases I try to isolate from other phrases, so that there's no questioning what that imagery is designed to do, and you don't get it mixed up with the next phrase. So one last question. We have Colton, who asks, how many stations should there be on average in the memory palace? Well, I'd say for beginners, always go for 10. Always start with 10. And if that's a challenge, just go for 5. But I think that you want to go for 10, because then it's not too little and it's not too much. Now, when it comes to application, when you're getting serious, I personally find that 50 stations is the max point, but it has to do with what the information is. So anytime that I've gone beyond 50, it's usually very small units of information. So things like the hiragana, for example, in Japanese, then in that case, I went beyond 50. And musical things that I've memorized in terms of poetry and uh, song lyrics have gone beyond 50 stations. But normally that's kind of the max, because you never want the memory palace to be an obstruction to memory. You want the memory palace to always be the thing that helps you remember. And when they get too big and too wieldy, they can make things sink rather than make them buoyant. And so that's always what it comes down to, is explore, experiment, figure out things on your own, and give it a chance on all things. I have definitely pushed beyond 50, and I don't like it. It doesn't really do what I want it to do with the speed and the accuracy and the ease of use that I want it to do. But that doesn't mean it wouldn't work for you. So you can definitely try that. But my sort of sweet spot is around between 25 and 50, and that gets gets things really working good. And then it just the whole point, if I can wrap all this up, is you want to be getting the results that you want. You want to actually be using the information that you memorize, as we talked about in the presentation, and you want it to be connected to helping you get what you want in life. And that's what we're doing at the live event in London. Is we are working on making memory palaces functional, really functional, making those images absolutely working 100% every time, so that you have no end of the instant images that you need in order to memorize information, and helping you achieve your goals, specific goals that really mean something for your future, and having your memory prepared for that. So with that said, I really look forward to seeing you in London, and I thank you so much for coming on to this webinar. I know we had some technical problems here and there, but I really appreciate that you stuck around, and I want to congratulate you on your interest in memory. It's an absolutely fantastic thing. Not everybody takes these steps. Not everybody cares that much about the quality of their minds and the quality of their lives, but you do, and you're here and you're studying, and you're going to go and apply these techniques and experiment with them and get results. And when you do, please bring your stories of what you have done to see Olly and I in London at Magnetic Memory Live. So going to sign off now, and thank you again for being here. I'm really honored, and I really, yeah, I'm just so grateful that you care about memory and that you were here today. So we'll talk very soon. Thank you for being here.